What if I told you that your phone, your Netflix binge, your late-night doom scroll, they're not bad habits. They're a drug addiction, and your brain is the one paying the price. Stop. Before you hit skip, before you tell yourself you'll listen later, I need you to hear this right now. The average American checks their phone 96 times a day. That's once every 10 minutes. You wake up exhausted. You sit down to work and can't focus for more than 3 minutes. You've got goals, real ones, but somehow the day disappears and you've done nothing that actually matters. Sound familiar? Here's what nobody's telling you. You're not lazy. You're not broken. You're dopamine hijacked. Your brain was built for a world that no longer exists, a world where rewards were rare, effort was real, and patience was survival. But today, every swipe, every like, every notification drops a hit of dopamine straight into your nervous system. And just like any drug, the more you get, the more you need, and the less everything else satisfies you. The result? Deep work feels impossible. Real relationships feel boring. Your dreams feel distant. And the life you actually want keeps getting pushed to someday. But here's the good news, and I mean real good news. You can reverse this. In 7 days. No willpower boot camp. No deleting all your apps forever. No living like a monk. Just 7 days of doing things differently, backed by neuroscience, proven by thousands of people who've already done it, and your brain starts to wake up again. Real motivation returns. Focus sharpens. Joy comes back from things that actually matter. This audiobook is your roadmap. If you've ever felt like your brain isn't yours anymore, stay with me, because it's about to be again. And if this hits close to home, do yourself one favor right now. Subscribe to Mindset Audiobooks, because what we're building here, chapter by chapter, is the version of you that finally shows up. Let's get into it. Introduction. Why your brain needs a reset. Welcome to Dopamine Detox. Reclaim your brain in 7 days. My name doesn't matter as much as this message does. So let's skip the formalities and get straight to what you came here for. This audiobook exists because of a crisis most people don't even know they're in. Across the United States, in offices, bedrooms, college dorms, and kitchen tables, millions of people are walking around with hijacked nervous systems, wondering why they can't get it together. They're smart. They're capable. They want more. But something keeps pulling them back. That something has a name: dopamine dysregulation. Over the next 10 chapters, we're going to break down exactly what's happening inside your brain, why modern life has turned one of your most powerful neurotransmitters against you, and, most importantly, how to take it back. Day by day, step by step. This isn't theory. This is practical. Every chapter gives you something you can do, starting today. As the legendary Viktor Frankl once said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. This audiobook is about reclaiming that space. We'll cover the science of dopamine without putting you to sleep. We'll walk through a real 7-day protocol you can actually follow. We'll talk about what happens when you stop feeding the noise, and what floods in to replace it. By the time you finish this audiobook, you won't just understand your brain better. You'll own it. 10 chapters. 7 days. One decision. The one you already made by pressing play. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The dopamine lie. What they never taught you about motivation. You've been told your whole life that motivation leads to action. What if that's completely backwards, and that lie is the reason you're stuck? Let's start with something that's going to flip everything you think you know about motivation, willpower, and success. You've heard it 1,000 times. Just get motivated. Find your why. Feel inspired, and then go do the thing. It sounds right. It sounds like something you'd put on a vision board. But here's the brutal truth most productivity gurus won't say out loud. Motivation doesn't create action. Action creates motivation. And the reason so many people are paralyzed, scrolling instead of building, watching instead of creating, dreaming instead of doing, is because they're waiting for a feeling that dopamine has made nearly impossible to access naturally. Let's talk about what dopamine actually is, because Hollywood and wellness culture have gotten it embarrassingly wrong. Dopamine is not the pleasure chemical. That's the myth. Dopamine is the anticipation chemical. It's the neurological signal that says something good might be coming, go get it. It's what lights up when you see a notification. when you pull the slot machine handle of your Instagram feed, when you hear the opening sound of YouTube. It's the chase, not the reward. Dr. Andrew Huberman, neuroscientist at Stanford, describes dopamine as the molecule of motivation, drive, and craving. When your dopamine system is healthy, you feel compelled to pursue real goals. You can delay gratification. You can sit with discomfort long enough for something meaningful to emerge. But when it's been hijacked, you feel that drive only toward the easiest available hit. And everything else, your real work, your real relationships, your real life, starts to feel flat. Here's where it gets real. Every time you get an easy dopamine hit, a funny video, a refreshing scroll, a quick sugar spike, a like on your post, your brain does something automatic and merciless. It recalibrates its baseline. It raises the bar for what counts as worth it. And suddenly, the things that used to feel satisfying, a walk outside, a meaningful conversation, making progress on a goal, they don't register the same way anymore. This is called dopamine tolerance. And it's not a character flaw. It's chemistry. Think of it like this. Imagine your brain is a volume dial. In a healthy, low-stimulation environment, that dial sits at 5. A beautiful sunset hits you at a 7. A deep conversation hits you at an 8. Real achievement hits you at a 9. Life feels rich. But after months or years of constant high-stimulation input, your baseline climbs to a 7. Now the sunset doesn't move you. The conversation feels dull. And real achievement? It barely registers. You need the extreme just to feel normal. That's where most Americans are living right now. And it's not their fault. They were never told this was happening. The trillion-dollar attention economy is built on one goal. Keep your dopamine system in overdrive so you never leave the platform. Every algorithm, every autoplay, every infinite scroll was engineered by rooms full of neuroscientists and behavioral psychologists to make sure your brain never gets a chance to reset. Sean Parker, the founding president of Facebook, admitted publicly, "We need to give you a little dopamine hit every once in a while because someone liked or commented on a photo or a post. It's a social validation feedback loop." He knew. They all knew. And they built it anyway. Now here's what makes this chapter so important, and what most people miss when they hear about dopamine detox for the first time. A dopamine detox is not about eliminating all pleasure. It's not about sitting in a white room staring at the wall. That version went viral a few years ago and gave the whole concept a bad reputation. The real science is more nuanced and far more powerful. A true dopamine detox is about lowering your stimulation floor so that real life, real effort, real connection, real reward can feel satisfying again. It's about teaching your brain that the boring, the difficult, and the slow are worth it. And here's the beautiful paradox. When you do this, hard things become easier. Not because they got less hard, but because your brain stopped comparing them to a slot machine and started experiencing them as the genuine rewards they actually are. James Clear, author of Atomic Habits, puts it perfectly. You do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. Your dopamine system, right now, is a system. And like any system, it can be rebuilt. That's exactly what the next 7 days are going to do. Starting in Chapter 2, we'll move into Day 1 of the protocol. What to do, what to avoid, and what to expect when your brain starts to push back. Because it will push back. Boredom is going to hit hard. Restlessness is going to feel unbearable for a minute. We'll talk about why that's actually the sign that it's working, and how to ride it through to the other side. But before we get there, I want you to sit with one question today. Not a complicated one. Just this. What is one thing in your life you've been putting off? Not because you can't do it, but because every time you sit down to start, something easier pulls you away. Hold that thing in your mind. Because by the end of this audiobook, that thing isn't going to feel impossible anymore. It's going to feel like exactly what you were built for. The lie was that you needed to feel motivated first. The truth is, your brain just needs a reset. And that reset starts now. Chapter 2, Day 1, The Discomfort is the Point. Most people quit a dopamine detox on Day 1. Not because it's too hard, but because nobody warned them that the discomfort they feel is actually proof it's working. Day 1 is where it gets real. You woke up this morning and maybe the first thing you did, before your feet even hit the floor, was reach for your phone. Maybe you checked your messages. Maybe you opened an app. Maybe you didn't even realize you'd done it until you were 3 minutes deep into something you didn't intend to look at. That automatic reach? That's not a personal failure. That's a neural pathway so deeply carved into your brain that it fires before conscious thought even has a chance to show up. And today, day 1, we start carving a new one. But here's what I need you to understand before we go any further, because this is the piece that makes or breaks the entire 7-day journey. Discomfort is not a sign that something's wrong. It's the signal that your brain is beginning to change. When you reduce stimulation, when you don't immediately feed the craving, your dopamine system does something that feels awful in the short term and is extraordinary in the long term. It starts to recalibrate downward. The baseline drops. And as it drops, something remarkable happens. The ordinary world starts to become interesting again. But getting there requires sitting through what neuroscientists call the dopamine dip. Here's the science. When you've been running on high stimulation input, social media, fast content, constant noise, your brain has been producing dopamine in large, frequent spikes. When you remove those spikes, your dopamine levels don't just return to baseline immediately. They actually drop below baseline for a period. That's the dip. The dip feels like boredom, restlessness, irritability, even mild anxiety. You'll pick up your phone and put it down and pick it up again. You'll feel like you should be doing something, even if there's nothing urgent to do. You might feel a vague sense of dissatisfaction with everything around you. That feeling has a name. It's called withdrawal. And yes, it's the same mechanism that operates in substance addiction. Different scale, same biology. Dr. Anna Lemke, psychiatrist at Stanford and author of Dopamine Nation, explains it this way. The brain seeks balance above everything else. When you flood it with stimulation, it compensates by down-regulating, numbing your receptors, lowering your natural output. Remove the flood, and the pendulum swings the other way before it finds center. The people who give up on day 1, they hit the dip, interpret it as failure, and reach for the nearest hit to make the feeling stop. That one move, that single surrender, resets the clock and reinforces the very pathway they were trying to break. So what do you do instead? You let it be boring. On purpose. Day 1 of the protocol has one primary rule, and it sounds deceptively simple. For at least 3 hours today, you do nothing that was designed to stimulate you. No social media. No streaming. No podcasts running in the background while you fold laundry. No YouTube rabbit holes. No video games. No news loops. No sugar hits disguised as treats. Nothing that was engineered by a tech company, a food scientist, or an entertainment algorithm to spike your dopamine faster than real life can. What you can do is expansive. Walk outside without headphones. Cook a meal from scratch. Sit with a journal. Read a physical book. Have a conversation with no screens in the room. Clean something. Build something. Stretch. Breathe. Stare out a window and let your mind actually wander. This is called low dopamine activity. And it's not punishment. It's medicine. Here's what happens in that space if you can stay in it. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for long-term thinking, delayed gratification, and actual decision-making, gets a chance to come back online. Because here's something most people don't know. Chronic overstimulation doesn't just affect your mood. It literally impairs your prefrontal cortex function. It makes you more impulsive, more reactive, and less able to connect today's choices to tomorrow's consequences. You've probably felt this. You know you should work on that project. You know that scrolling for another hour won't make you feel better. And you do it anyway. That's not weakness. That's a prefrontal cortex that's been crowded out by a dopamine system running in overdrive. 3 hours of low stimulation today begins the process of handing control back to the part of your brain that can actually think clearly. Now, let's talk about the moment you'll almost certainly face sometime today. We'll call it the itch. The itch is that sudden, intense, almost physical urge to just check something. To just look at your phone for 1 second. To just put something on in the background. It arrives fast, it feels urgent, and it lies to you. It tells you that something important is happening that you're missing, that everyone else is connected and you're falling behind, that the discomfort you feel is a problem that needs to be solved right now. The itch is not an emergency. It is a craving. And like all cravings, it has a lifespan. Research consistently shows that if you don't feed a craving within the first 10 to 15 minutes, it begins to subside on its own. The brain checks in, gets no reward signal, and moves on. Your only job when the itch hits today is to outlast it by 15 minutes. That's it. Not forever. Not the rest of your life. Just 15 minutes. Do something with your hands. Go outside. Write down what you're feeling. And when the 15 minutes are up, 9 times out of 10, the urgency will have passed. As Dr. Viktor Frankl taught us, the gap between stimulus and response is where our freedom lives. Day 1 is about finding that gap again, not through force, but through patience. By the end of today, you may not feel dramatically different. And that's okay. The goal of day 1 isn't transformation. It's simply this: prove to your brain that you can tolerate the dip. Because once you prove that, once you sit in the discomfort and come out the other side, everything that follows gets easier. The silence won't feel as loud tomorrow. The boredom will start to shift into something quieter. And in that quiet, something you haven't heard in a long time begins to speak. We'll talk about what that voice is and how to use it in Chapter 3. Chapter 3, Day 2, Stop Fasting, Start Redirecting. Everyone's talking about dopamine fasting like it's the answer. But what if the whole idea has been misunderstood? And the real strategy is something completely different and completely more powerful. You made it through day 1. And if yesterday felt uncomfortable, if you caught yourself reaching for your phone, if the silence felt louder than expected, if boredom hit harder than you thought it would, I want you to hear this clearly. That means it worked. The discomfort wasn't a setback. It was your brain waking up to the gap between where it's been living and where it actually wants to be. That gap is exactly where transformation happens. Today is day 2. And today, we need to have an honest conversation about a concept that went massively viral and massively wrong. Dopamine fasting. If you've spent any time in the self-improvement space online, you've seen it. Videos of people sitting alone in empty rooms, no food, no music, no conversation, staring at blank walls for an entire day. It became a Silicon Valley trend, a Reddit movement, a content goldmine. And while the people promoting it had real intentions, the idea got distorted into something the neuroscience simply does not support. Here's the truth: you cannot fast from dopamine. It is not possible. Dopamine is not a substance you consume. It is a neurotransmitter your brain produces continuously. Even sitting in a silent room, your brain is releasing dopamine. When you breathe, when you have a thought, when you notice light changing through a window, dopamine is always moving. What you can do, and what the real science actually supports, is redirect it. Redirecting dopamine means consciously choosing which activities get your dopamine response, and building a lifestyle where your highest hits come from your highest value actions. Not from eliminating reward, but from reassigning it. Think of it this way: your dopamine system is like a river. You can't stop the river from flowing, but you can change where it flows. Right now, for most people, that river has been rerouted by tech companies, food engineers, and entertainment platforms to flow through their channels, their apps, their content, their products. The river isn't yours anymore. A dopamine detox, done right, is about reclaiming the riverbed, redirecting the current back toward the things you actually chose, the goals you actually set, the life you actually want to live. And day 2 is where that redirect begins. Here's how it works practically. Yesterday, you practiced removal, 3 hours of low stimulation, sitting in the dip, outlasting the itch. Today, we add the second half of the equation: intentional replacement. For every high stimulation habit you're pulling back from, you need to assign a replacement activity that is. And this is critical, genuinely effortful, and genuinely rewarding. Not easy, not passive, something that requires you to show up. Why effort? Because here's what the neuroscience is clear on. Dopamine spikes highest not at the moment of reward, but at the moment of effort leading to reward. The anticipation of earning something real, a skill developed, a problem solved, a physical challenge met, produces a deeper, more lasting dopamine response than any passive hit a screen can deliver. Andrew Huberman calls this the effort-reward circuit, and it's the key to rebuilding a healthy dopamine baseline. When you do hard things by choice and experience the reward on the other side, your brain learns a new equation: effort equals satisfaction. And once that equation is wired in, motivation stops being something you have to chase. It becomes something that shows up on its own. So today, your assignment has 2 parts. Part 1. Continue the low stimulation windows from yesterday. Same rule. At least 3 hours where you're not feeding the noise. Part 2. Choose one effortful activity and commit to 30 minutes of it today. 1. That's all. It could be physical, a workout, a run, a long walk with intention. It could be creative, writing, drawing, building, playing an instrument. It could be intellectual, reading something challenging, learning a skill, working on a project that matters to you. The category doesn't matter. The effort does. And when you finish that 30 minutes, even if it was hard, even if it felt slow, even if the output wasn't impressive, notice what your body does. There's a good chance you feel something you haven't felt in a while. A quiet satisfaction. A kind of earned calm. That's dopamine landing where it was always supposed to land. That feeling is what we're rebuilding your life around. Now, let's talk about the other critical shift that happens on day 2, and it lives in your relationship with your phone. Most people approach their phone like it's a neutral tool. It's not. It is, by design, the single most sophisticated dopamine delivery device ever created. And the problem isn't just how much you use it. It's the randomness of the reward. Psychologist B.F. Skinner discovered decades ago that variable reward schedules, where rewards come unpredictably, create the most compulsive behavior patterns. It's why slot machines are more addictive than vending machines. You always know what a vending machine gives you. A slot machine? Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. That uncertainty is the hook. Your social media feed is a slot machine. Every pull, every refresh might deliver something exciting, meaningful, funny, or validating. Or it might deliver nothing. That unpredictability is not an accident. It is a design feature. And your brain, ancient and pattern-seeking, cannot resist it without a deliberate counter-strategy. That counter-strategy starts today. Before you pick up your phone for anything, ask yourself one question. Am I choosing this, or is this choosing me? Not to create guilt. Not to judge the answer. Just to insert that pause, that space between stimulus and response, that Frankl talked about. Because in that pause, your prefrontal cortex gets a vote. And over time, that vote starts to win more often. You are not trying to eliminate your phone from your life. You are trying to make it a tool again, not a ruler. By the end of day 2, something subtle but important should be shifting. The dip from yesterday is beginning to level out. Your brain is starting, just starting, to remember what it feels like to be present without needing to be entertained. In Chapter 4, we go deeper into that presence. Because day 3 is where people either break through or quietly give up. And I'm going to make sure you break through. Chapter 4, Day 3, the breakthrough or the breakdown. Day 3 is the moment most people secretly quit. Not out loud, not dramatically, but quietly. One small compromise that unravels everything. Today, we make sure that's not you. Day 3 has a reputation. Ask anyone who has seriously attempted a dopamine detox, a digital detox, a social media cleanse, any intentional period of reduced stimulation, and they will almost always point to day 3 as the hinge point. The place where everything either clicks into focus or quietly falls apart. And it's not random. There's a neurological reason day 3 hits differently, and understanding it is the difference between pushing through and giving up without even realizing you gave up. Here's what's happening inside your brain right now. Over the past 2 days, you've been reducing the frequency of high dopamine inputs. Your brain, which adapted to those inputs by downregulating its sensitivity, is now in the middle of recalibrating. The receptors that went numb from overstimulation are beginning to wake back up. The baseline that was artificially elevated is starting to settle back toward its natural level. This process is called neurological sensitization. And right in the middle of it, around day 3, the brain does something predictable and deeply uncomfortable. It gets loud, not in a productive way. In a restless, scattered, almost frantic way. Thoughts race. Focus feels impossible. You might feel irritable for no clear reason. You might feel a strange sadness. Not depression exactly, but a flatness, a gray quality to the day. You might find yourself standing in a room and not knowing why you walked in there. Your mind keeps reaching for something to grab onto and finding nothing satisfying. This is what researchers call the fog. And it is, counterintuitively, one of the best signs you can get on this journey. Because the fog doesn't mean your brain is broken. It means your brain is restructuring. The old pathways, the ones that lit up every time you reached for a cheap hit, are going quiet. And the deeper, slower, more meaningful pathways are beginning to warm up. The fog is the transition, and the only way out is through. But here's the danger of day 3, and why so many people fall off without even noticing. The compromise that derails most people isn't dramatic. It's not, "I'm quitting the detox." It's much quieter. It sounds like, "I'll just check my messages real quick. One episode won't hurt. I've been doing so well, I deserve a little break." And that one small breach, that single re-exposure to a high-stimulation hit right in the middle of the fog, delivers an immediate flood of relief. The fog lifts. The restlessness settles. The brain sighs with satisfaction. And then resets. Completely. Back to square one. This is why day 3 demands something different from you. Not more discipline. Discipline is fragile and finite. What it demands is strategy. Today's strategy has a name: scheduled engagement. Instead of trying to white-knuckle your way through the fog on raw willpower, you're going to give your brain something real to lock onto, something challenging enough to absorb your attention, meaningful enough to feel worth the effort, and structured enough that your scattered mind has a container to work inside of. Here's what that looks like in practice. Block out a 2-hour window today. Morning works best, but any time is better than none. And give it entirely to one project, one skill, one physical challenge, or one creative pursuit that requires your sustained attention. Not multitasking. Not background noise. Just one thing with your full presence for 2 hours. If 2 hours feels impossible right now, start with 45 minutes. Set a timer. Tell yourself the only job you have for the next 45 minutes is to stay with this one thing. When your mind wanders, and it will probably every 3 minutes at first, bring it back. Gently, without judgment, like you're training a puppy that keeps running toward the road. You don't punish it. You just redirect it, again and again, until it learns that here is safe. This practice has a name in neuroscience: deep work. Cal Newport, professor and author of the book by the same name, defines it as professional activity performed in a state of distraction-free concentration that pushes your cognitive capabilities to their limit. And the research is unambiguous. Deep work doesn't just produce better output. It produces profound satisfaction. It is, Newport argues, one of the most reliable sources of meaning available to knowledge workers in the modern world. But here's what Newport's research also shows. Deep work is a skill. And like any skill, it atrophies when unused. If you've been living in a constant stream of shallow, fragmented, high-stimulation input, and most Americans have been, your capacity for deep work has shrunk. Not disappeared. Shrunk. And it can be rebuilt, starting today, 45 minutes at a time. Now let's talk about something that sounds almost offensive in a productivity conversation, but is backed by serious science. Boredom is a superpower. Not the restless, itchy, uncomfortable boredom from day 1. Not the fog of day 3. A deeper kind, what researchers call profound boredom. The state that arrives when your mind has been quiet long enough, undirected long enough, that it begins to generate on its own. Psychologist Sandy Mann at the University of Central Lancashire found that people who were intentionally bored before creative tasks significantly outperformed those who weren't. Because boredom, at its deepest level, activates the brain's default mode network, the system responsible for imagination, self-reflection, future planning, and creative connection-making. Your default mode network is where your best ideas live. It's where you figure out who you are, what you actually want, and how the pieces of your life connect. But it can only activate when the noise stops. When you stop feeding it content and let it generate. Every time you reach for your phone the moment boredom arrives, you are shutting down the most creative, most insightful, most authentically human part of your brain. You're trading your inner voice for someone else's content. And over time, you stop being able to hear yourself at all. Day 3 asks you to listen. During your low-stimulation windows today, when the boredom arrives and the fog rolls in, instead of fighting it, try something radical. Get curious about it. Ask yourself what's underneath it. What thought is your brain trying to avoid? What feeling is waiting just below the surface? What idea has been trying to reach you that the noise keeps drowning out? You don't have to have answers. You just have to be willing to sit in the question. By the end of today, the fog will begin to thin. Not completely, but enough that you'll catch a glimpse of something on the other side. A quieter mind, a longer attention span, a faint but unmistakable sense that you are beginning to come back to yourself. That glimpse is everything. Hold on to it, because in Chapter 5, we hit the halfway mark, Day 4, and that's where we talk about the one thing almost nobody addresses in detox conversations. What you do with the people in your life who are still fully plugged in. Chapter 5, Day 4, The People Problem. You can control your phone. You can control your environment. But what happens when the biggest threat to your dopamine detox isn't a screen? It's the people sitting right next to you. You've made it to the halfway point, 4 days in. And if you've been following the protocol, the low stimulation windows, the effortful replacement activities, the deep work blocks, the willingness to sit inside the fog instead of running from it. Something real is happening inside your brain right now, even if you can't fully feel it yet. Your dopamine receptors are becoming more sensitive. Your baseline is dropping toward its natural level. The prefrontal cortex that was being crowded out by noise is starting to reclaim its seat at the table. You are, neurologically speaking, becoming more yourself again. And right at this moment, right when the momentum is building, Day 4 introduces the challenge that nobody in the dopamine detox conversation talks about enough. Other people. Not in a cynical way. Not because the people in your life are bad or selfish or trying to hold you back, but because human beings are, at our core, deeply social creatures, and our nervous systems are wired to synchronize with the people around us. We mirror each other's energy, behavior, emotional states, and whether we realize it or not, our dopamine habits. This is what neuroscientists call social contagion, and it operates far below the level of conscious choice. When you spend extended time with someone who is constantly checking their phone, your own urge to check yours increases, even if you don't pick it up. When you're in a group where everyone is streaming, scrolling, and consuming, the pull to join that consumption loop intensifies. When the people closest to you live on high stimulation input as their default state, staying in a low stimulation zone becomes exponentially harder. It's not weakness. It's neurology. Mirror neurons, the brain cells responsible for empathy and behavioral synchronization, don't distinguish between habits worth mirroring and habits worth avoiding. They just mirror. That's their job. Dr. Nicholas Christakis, sociologist and physician at Yale, has spent decades studying social contagion. His research shows that behaviors, including health behaviors, emotional states, and yes, consumption habits, spread through social networks with the same predictability as viruses. Your habits influence your friends. Their habits influence you. And the influence extends up to 3 degrees of separation. People you've never met are shaping your behavior through the chain of social connection. So what do you do with that on Day 4? You don't cut people off. You don't become a hermit. You don't lecture your friends about dopamine over dinner and wonder why they stop inviting you places. That's not the move. The move is something more nuanced, more powerful, and far more sustainable. It's called environment design. And it starts with one honest assessment. Who in your life pulls you toward high stimulation, and who pulls you toward depth? Take a mental inventory. Not to judge anyone, just to see clearly. There are people in your life who, when you spend time with them, you feel more scattered, more reactive, more pulled toward noise and distraction. And there are people, maybe fewer of them, who leave you feeling more grounded, more focused, more like the version of yourself you're working toward becoming. Jim Rohn, the legendary business philosopher, said it plainly and permanently. You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. That observation wasn't motivational fluff. It was a neurological reality decades before the science caught up to it. During your detox, and honestly beyond it, your job is to increase your exposure to depth-pulling people and decrease your exposure to noise-pulling situations. Not perfectly, not absolutely, just deliberately. Here's what that looks like in practical terms on Day 4. First, have the conversation. Not a big dramatic announcement. Just a simple, honest statement to the people closest to you. Your partner, your roommate, your best friend, your family, that you're doing something intentional with your focus and your phone habits this week. You don't need their permission. You don't need their agreement. You just need them to know, so that your choices don't become a source of friction or confusion in the relationship. Most people, when told clearly and without judgment, will either respect it or get curious. Some might even want to join you. And a few might push back, tease you, minimize it, tell you you're being dramatic. That reaction, by the way, is itself data. It tells you that your change is bumping up against their comfort with staying the same. Second, protect your low stimulation windows socially. This means being willing to say no, kindly but firmly, to social situations that are guaranteed high stimulation traps during your detox window. The bar where everyone's on their phones. The group chat that never stops. The Netflix night that was supposed to be 2 hours and turns into 5. You're not avoiding people. You're protecting the environment your brain needs to finish what you started. Third, and this one is the most important, use your social time as a dopamine redirector. Real human connection, it turns out, is one of the most powerful natural dopamine sources available to us. Not the parasocial kind, watching someone else's life on a screen. Actual face-to-face, phone-free, fully present conversation with another human being. Research from the Harvard Study of Adult Development, the longest-running study on human happiness ever conducted, spanning over 80 years, found that the single greatest predictor of well-being, cognitive health, and life satisfaction wasn't wealth, achievement, or even physical health. It was the quality of close relationships. Not quantity, quality. The depth of real, present, reciprocal human connection. Your dopamine system was built, in large part, for this. For being seen, heard, and genuinely connected to other people. Every hour you spend in meaningful conversation, in collaborative effort, in shared laughter that comes from real presence, your brain rewards that with the kind of dopamine hit that leaves you feeling full, not empty. Satisfied, not craving more. That is the opposite of what a screen delivers. A screen leaves you wanting the next thing. A real conversation, real shared experience, a real moment of human depth that leaves you complete. So today, day 4, your challenge is this. Spend at least 1 hour in fully phone-free, fully present interaction with another person. No devices on the table. No half attention. No mental tab open on something else. Just presence. Full, deliberate, generous presence. Notice what happens in your body during that hour. Notice the quality of attention you're able to bring when nothing is competing for it. Notice how the other person responds to being genuinely seen. That feeling, that quality of connection, is available to you every single day. It's been there the whole time. The noise just made it impossible to access. As you head into the second half of this journey, carry this with you. You are not detoxing from life. You are detoxing back into it. Back into the full, rich, textured, deeply human experience that got buried under the feed. The people who matter most to you, they're part of the life you're returning to. In Chapter 6, we hit day 5, and we go somewhere most detox conversations never go, the identity shift. Because by now, something is changing not just in your habits, but in how you see yourself. And that shift, if you understand it, becomes the most powerful force in this entire journey. Chapter 6, Day 5, you are not who you were last week. Willpower runs out. Motivation disappears. Discipline gets exhausted. But there is one force that outlasts all of them, and most people never think to use it. It's called identity. And by day 5, yours is already changing. 5 days in. Stop for a moment and actually register that. 5 days ago, your brain was running on a completely different operating system. It was wired for constant input, instant reward, and frictionless consumption. Every quiet moment was an emergency to be filled. Every pause was a problem to be solved with a screen. And now, something is different. Maybe you can't name it precisely yet. Maybe it's subtle, a slightly longer attention span, a morning that started without immediately reaching for your phone, a moment yesterday where you sat in silence, and it didn't feel unbearable. Maybe it's bigger, a sense of clarity returning, a creative thought surfacing that surprised you, an unexpected feeling of calm settling into parts of your day that used to feel frantic. Whatever you're noticing, here's what I need you to understand about it. This is not temporary motivation. This is identity beginning to shift. And that distinction between motivation and identity is the most important concept in this entire audiobook. Because motivation is a weather system. It comes and goes based on conditions you can't always control. You feel it strongly one morning, and it's completely absent the next. Building a life on motivation is like building a house on sand. It looks solid until the tide comes in. Identity is bedrock. When you change not just what you do, but who you believe yourself to be. When you shift from, I'm trying to use my phone less, to, I'm someone who protects my focus. The behavioral change stops being an effort and starts being an expression. You don't have to fight yourself every morning. You just act in accordance with who you are. James Clear, whose framework in Atomic Habits has reached tens of millions of people, puts it this way. Every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. 5 days of intentional choices, 5 days of saying no to cheap hits and yes to real effort, is not just 5 days of good behavior. It is 5 days of votes. 5 days of evidence, accumulating inside your own nervous system, that you are becoming a different kind of person. And here is the neuroscience that makes this more than metaphor. Your brain maintains what psychologists call a self-concept, a running model of who you are, how you behave, and what you're capable of. This model is not fixed. It updates constantly based on your behavior. When your actions consistently contradict your old self-concept, the brain eventually does something remarkable. It rewrites the model to match the new behavior. This process is called cognitive consistency. Your brain is deeply motivated to align your self-image with your actions, because inconsistency between the two creates psychological tension that the brain works constantly to resolve. The question is always, which direction does the resolution go? Does your self-image pull your behavior back to old patterns? Or does your behavior pull your self-image forward into new ones? The answer depends almost entirely on which story you're telling yourself about what you're doing. If you've been framing this week as a detox, a temporary restriction, a short-term cleanse before returning to normal, your brain will hold that frame. It will mark this as an exception, not an evolution. And the moment the 7 days are up, it will snap back to baseline like a rubber band. But if you've been framing this week as the beginning of who you actually are, as evidence of a person who values depth over noise, presence over performance, real reward over cheap stimulation, your brain begins to encode that as identity. And identity, once encoded, becomes self-reinforcing. You protect it. You act from it. You make decisions through its lens without having to consciously think about it. So today, day 5, we're going to make that reframe explicit. We're going to do something that might feel uncomfortable if you're not used to it, but that the research consistently shows is one of the most powerful tools for lasting behavioral change. You're going to write a new story about yourself. Not fiction, not fantasy, a grounded, honest, forward-facing statement of who you are becoming, written in the present tense, as if it's already true. Psychologists call this an identity statement. It's not an affirmation in the shallow, repeat it until you believe its sense. It's a deliberate act of cognitive reframing, giving your brain a new model to update toward. Here's what it looks like in practice. Find 10 minutes today, journal, notes app, back of an envelope, whatever works, and finish these 3 sentences. I am someone who. Describe the behavior or value you're building toward. I am someone who protects my attention and gives my best focus to what matters most. I have proven this because. Name the specific evidence from this week. I have proven this because I spent 5 days choosing discomfort over convenience, depth over noise, and presence over distraction. The person I am becoming will. Describe one concrete way this identity shows up in your future. The person I am becoming will do deep work every morning, build things that last, and show up fully for the people I love. Read it back, out loud if you can. Because here's what that act does neurologically. It activates the brain's narrative processing system, the same system that encodes your most formative memories and your strongest held beliefs. When you hear yourself say something about who you are, in your own voice, your brain treats it with the same weight as lived experience. It becomes part of the story. This is not magic. This is not manifestation culture. This is applied cognitive science. The same approach used in elite athletic performance coaching, evidence-based therapy, and high-performance leadership development across America's top organizations. Now let's talk about something that surfaces strongly on day 5. The temptation to celebrate too early. You've done something hard. You've earned that acknowledgement. But the brain, still recalibrating, still finding its footing, is vulnerable right now to a very specific trap. It's the trap of rewarding real progress with the very thing you've been pulling away from. I've been so disciplined this week, I deserve to scroll for an hour. That logic feels fair. It even sounds reasonable. But what it actually does is reintroduce the old reward pathway at the exact moment the new one is consolidating. It's like running a marathon, stopping at mile 23, and taking a nap on the course. The work was real. The nap undoes the finish. Your reward today, your genuine, earned, neurologically sound reward, is a high-quality, effortful, deeply satisfying activity of your choice. Something that produces the good kind of tired. Something that leaves you feeling like you built something, moved something, created something, or connected with something real. That is the celebration your brain actually needs right now. 2 days remain. And in Chapter 7, we hit Day 6, the day when the new baseline finally becomes something you can feel clearly. The fog is gone. The dip is behind you. And what's waiting on the other side is something that's going to change how you think about your own potential. Chapter 7, Day 6, Building Your Dopamine Architecture. Most people finish a detox and slide right back into the same patterns within 2 weeks. Not because they're weak, but because they never built anything to replace what they removed. Today, we build the architecture that makes sure that never happens to you. Day 6, 1 day from the finish line. And if you've been present with this journey, genuinely showing up for the protocol, doing the work, sitting inside the discomfort instead of running from it, something significant should be landing for you right now. The fog of Day 3 is gone. The social friction of Day 4 has settled. The identity reframe of Day 5 has taken root. And today, for many people who reach this point, something arrives that is hard to describe but impossible to miss. Call it clarity. Call it presence. Call it finally being able to hear yourself think. Your brain's dopamine baseline has dropped closer to its natural level. The receptors that were numbed by overstimulation have regained sensitivity. That sunset that used to feel flat, it registers differently now. That first cup of coffee in the morning, it actually tastes like something. That conversation with someone you love, it lands with a fullness it hasn't had in longer than you probably realized. This is not a placebo. This is your nervous system returning to a state it was always designed to inhabit. And the question that Day 6 puts directly in front of you is the most important one of this entire journey. How do you make sure this lasts? Because here's the reality that nobody in the quick fix, 7-day challenge content world wants to talk about. A detox without architecture is just a vacation. You go somewhere beautiful, you feel restored, you come home. And within 2 weeks, the same environment, the same habits, the same social pressures, and the same algorithmic pull reassemble themselves around you. And you're right back where you started, except now you have the added weight of having tried and slipped back. The people who make this change permanent don't have more willpower than you. They don't have more discipline, more motivation, or more favorable circumstances. What they have is a system, a deliberately designed daily structure where their highest dopamine rewards are consistently and reliably attached to their highest value actions. That system has a name, Dopamine Architecture. And today we build yours. Dopamine Architecture is the intentional design of your environment, your schedule, your triggers, and your reward systems so that your brain's natural motivation circuitry works for your goals instead of against them. It operates on 3 foundational principles. Master these 3, and the life you rebuilt this week doesn't fade. It compounds. Principle 1, attach dopamine to process, not outcome. Here's one of the most damaging lies modern achievement culture sells, that the reward is at the finish line. Get the degree, feel the dopamine. Land the promotion, feel the dopamine. Hit the goal weight, feel the dopamine. So you push and grind and delay all satisfaction until arrival. And when you get there, the hit is smaller than you expected, shorter than you hoped, and followed almost immediately by the question, now what? This is called arrival fallacy, a term coined by Harvard psychologist Tal Ben-Shahar. The brain doesn't actually deliver its biggest dopamine response at the moment of achievement. It delivers it during the pursuit, during the effort, the progress, the forward movement towards something meaningful. Which means the single most powerful thing you can do to sustain motivation long-term is to fall in love with the process. Not tolerate it, not endure it, Actually find genuine satisfaction in the daily act of showing up, doing the work, and moving forward, independent of whether today's session produced a visible result. In practical terms, this means building process-based rewards into your daily architecture. After your deep work block, acknowledge the effort, not the output. After your workout, mark the showing up, not the performance. After a meaningful conversation, appreciate the presence, not what was accomplished. Train your brain to release dopamine at the act of engagement itself, and motivation becomes self-sustaining. Principle 2. Design friction into low-value inputs. Behavioral economists call it choice architecture. The idea that the ease or difficulty of a behavior determines how often it gets chosen, independent of conscious intention. Your phone is frictionless. Your highest value work is not. And that asymmetry is quietly destroying your productivity every single day. The solution is to deliberately reverse it. Make the low-value, high-stimulation inputs harder to access. Make the high-value, meaningful activities easier to begin. This doesn't require heroic effort. It requires small, strategic environmental adjustments. Charge your phone outside your bedroom. Delete the most compulsive apps from your home screen. Not permanently, but buried 3 folders deep, requiring conscious effort to reach. Put your journal, your book, your instrument, your running shoes in visible, accessible, ready-to-go positions. Set your browser homepage to your most important current project instead of a news feed. These micro-frictions and micro-facilitations are invisible in the moment, but over weeks and months, they compound into dramatically different behavioral outcomes. B.J. Fogg, behavioral scientist at Stanford and author of Tiny Habits, has studied this for decades. His conclusion is unambiguous. Environment is behavior. The person you become is largely determined by the environment you inhabit. Design the environment intentionally, and the behavior follows almost automatically. Principle 3. Protect your peak hours like they're sacred. Every person has a neurological window, typically 2 to 4 hours, where their prefrontal cortex is operating at peak capacity. Dopamine sensitivity is highest. Focus is deepest. Creative and analytical capability is at its maximum. For most people, this window falls in the morning, roughly 1 to 4 hours after waking. What do most people do with that window? They fill it with email, social media, news, and other people's demands. They spend their highest cognitive currency on the lowest value transactions of the day. And by the time they get to the work that actually matters, the deep work, the creative work, the meaningful work, they're running on cognitive fumes. Your dopamine architecture must include one non-negotiable rule. Your peak hours belong to your most important work. Nothing else gets in first. No phone, no messages, no news, no social media. Before the world makes its demands on you, you make your investment in yourself. 1 to 2 hours every morning on the work that moves the needle on the life you're building. This single structural change, practiced consistently, produces results that most people spend years chasing through motivation hacks and productivity systems that never quite stick. Now bring all 3 principles together, and you have something genuinely powerful. A daily architecture where effort is rewarded at the process level, where your environment pulls you toward depth instead of noise, and where your best cognitive hours are protected for your most meaningful work. This is not a rigid prison. It's a framework, flexible enough to accommodate real life, structured enough to hold your intentions when the pressure of the world pushes back. Write your architecture down today. Specifically, what does your morning look like? When is your deep work window? Where does your phone live during peak hours? What replacement activities are permanently assigned to the moments when the old urges used to win? The clearer the architecture, the less work your willpower has to do. And the less work your willpower has to do, the more energy you have for the things that actually matter. Tomorrow is day 7, the final day, and chapter 8 is waiting with something that will reframe everything you've built this week. Not as an ending, but as the most important beginning of your life. Chapter 8, Day 7, The Return. You did the 7 days. You rebuilt the baseline. You reclaimed your brain. Now comes the part nobody prepares you for. Walking back into the world that broke you in the first place, without breaking again. Day 7. You're here. Take a breath and actually feel the weight of that. 7 days ago, You made a decision that most people in your life haven't made and won't make. You decided that your attention was worth protecting, that your brain was worth reclaiming, that the life quietly disappearing behind a screen was worth fighting for. And you followed through the fog, through the itch, through the social friction, through the identity discomfort, through every moment where the easiest thing in the world would have been to reach for the nearest cheap hit and call it a day. You didn't. And that matters more than you currently know. But here's where day 7 gets complicated. And I want to be honest with you about this, because the sugar-coated version of this conversation would be a disservice to everything you've worked for this week. Re-entering the stimulation-saturated world is the hardest part of any detox. Not the detox itself, the return. Think about it through any lens that resonates. The recovering alcoholic who gets clean in treatment and then has to go home to the same neighborhood, the same friends, the same triggers. The person who eats clean for a month and then walks back into the office where someone always brings donuts on Friday. The context changes. The cues don't. And the brain, ancient, associative, and deeply tied to environment, starts firing the old patterns the moment the old environment reappears. Your digital environment works exactly the same way. The apps are still there. The algorithms haven't changed. Your phone still buzzes with the same notifications. The group chats didn't pause while you were recalibrating. The infinite scroll is still infinite. And the moment you pick your phone back up without a clear, conscious plan for how you're re-entering that world, the pull is immediate and stronger than you expect because your receptors are now more sensitive, not less. This is what researchers call cue-induced craving. The environmental trigger fires the old neural pathway before conscious thought has a chance to intervene. You don't decide to scroll, you're already scrolling. You don't choose to check, you've already checked. The behavior precedes the awareness. So the return cannot be passive. It cannot be, I'll just be more mindful now. Mindfulness without structure is a wish, not a strategy. The return has to be intentional, architected, and rule-based, at least until the new patterns are strong enough to hold their own against the old cues. Here is the framework for a conscious return. 3 rules, simple enough to remember, powerful enough to protect everything you've built. Rule 1. Reintroduce on your terms, not the algorithms. The biggest mistake people make when finishing a detox is opening their apps with no intention, just checking what they missed. That passive, directionless reentry is exactly what the algorithm is designed to exploit. It has 7 days of your absence to make up for, and it will serve you the most emotionally activating, most engagement-optimized content it has available the moment you return. Outrage, drama, comparison, FOMO, all of it calculated to spike your dopamine and keep you on the platform as long as possible. Instead, return with a specific purpose and a time limit. I am opening Instagram for 10 minutes to respond to messages from people I actually know. Not to browse, not to explore, not to see what's trending. A defined purpose, a set duration, and when the time is up, you close it. Every single time. This sounds rigid. It is. Intentionally. Because the algorithm is not neutral, and your brain is not yet strong enough to freelance in that environment without clear guardrails. The rigidity is temporary. The habit it builds is permanent. Rule 2. Keep your mornings sacred forever. The dopamine architecture you built yesterday, particularly the protection of your peak morning hours, does not end with the detox. It becomes the non-negotiable foundation of your daily life going forward. No phone for the first 60 minutes of every morning. That rule, practiced consistently, is worth more to your long-term cognitive health, creative output, and emotional stability than almost any other single habit in existence. The research on this is overwhelming. Your brain's first hour sets the neurochemical tone for the entire day. Feed it noise, and it runs on reactivity. Feed it silence, depth, and intentional focus, and it runs on clarity. 60 minutes. Every morning, before the world gets in. That one rule alone, carried forward from today, will compound into a fundamentally different life within 90 days. Not because it's magic, because it's math. 60 minutes of protected depth every morning, multiplied by 365 days, equals over 360 hours of your best cognitive work per year. Applied to anything meaningful in your life, a business, a creative project, a relationship, a skill that is transformational. Rule 3. Build a weekly reset. Even with the best architecture, even with the strongest identity shift, even with the most carefully designed environment, life is going to push back. Stressful weeks will happen. Old cues will fire. Obligations will pile up, and the low stimulation windows will get squeezed out. That's not failure. That's life. The difference between people who sustain this change and people who drift back is not that the sustainers never slip. It's that they have a scheduled reset built into every week that catches the drift before it becomes a slide. Pick one day per week. Sunday works well for most Americans, the natural reset point before the week begins. And make it a lighter stimulation day. Not as strict as the detox week, but intentional. No mindless scrolling in the morning. A long walk without headphones. A meal cooked from scratch. An hour of something creative or deeply physical. A genuine conversation with someone you love. Think of it as a weekly tune-up for your dopamine system. A recalibration that prevents the baseline from creeping back up before you notice it happening. Small, consistent, sustainable. The opposite of the dramatic detox you had to do this week precisely because there was no maintenance system in place before. Now let's talk about something that the productivity world almost never discusses, but that science is unambiguous about. Rest is not the opposite of performance. It is a component of it. The default mode network, your brain's creativity and self-reflection system, only activates during genuine rest. Not passive consumption. Not background noise. Real rest. Stillness. Unstructured time. And the research from institutions including Harvard, Stanford, and the NIH consistently shows that the people who protect genuine rest produce better work, make better decisions, sustain higher motivation, and report significantly greater life satisfaction than those who treat every idle moment as a productivity opportunity. You are not a machine. You are a biological system that requires genuine recovery to operate at its highest level. The detox gave you a glimpse of what that recovery feels like. The architecture protects it going forward, and the weekly reset ensures it never fully disappears. Day 7 is not the end of something. It is the first day of the life you rebuilt this week. The brain you carry into tomorrow is not the same brain you had 7 days ago. It is more sensitive, more present, more capable of depth, more able to find genuine satisfaction in real effort and real connection. That brain is yours. It was always yours. You just reclaimed it. In Chapter 9, we go somewhere deeper, beyond the protocol, beyond the architecture, into the question that this entire journey has been quietly building toward. What do you actually want to do with a reclaimed brain? Because getting your focus back is only half the story. Knowing where to point it is everything. Chapter 9, The Reclaimed Life. What are you going to do with your brain now? You reclaimed your focus. You rebuilt your baseline. You rewired the architecture. But here's the question nobody asks after the detox is done, and it's the most important question of all. Now that your brain is yours again, what are you actually going to do with it? There's a moment that happens to almost everyone who completes a serious dopamine reset. It arrives quietly, usually somewhere between day 7 and day 10. The fog is gone. The architecture is in place. The morning routine is holding. The deep work sessions are producing real results. The people around you are noticing something different, a steadiness, a presence, a quality of attention that wasn't there before. And then, in the middle of all that clarity, a question surfaces. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet, persistent, impossible to ignore question that the noise was drowning out for years. What do I actually want? Not what your algorithm wants for you. Not what your social circle expects from you. Not what the culture tells you to chase or consume or perform. What you, the real, present, fully awake version of you that just spent 7 days fighting to resurface, actually want from this one life you have. This is the question that a reclaimed brain makes possible. And it is, without exaggeration, the most important question you will ever sit with. Because here is the truth that most self-improvement content skips entirely. Focus without direction is just restless energy. Discipline without purpose is just suffering with better branding. You can have the cleanest dopamine baseline in America, the most perfectly designed morning routine, the most sophisticated dopamine architecture. and still spend the next decade building someone else's dream, chasing someone else's definition of success, and wondering why it never quite feels like enough. The detox was not the destination. It was the clearing. Now you have to decide what gets planted in the cleared ground. So let's talk about purpose, not in the vague, poster-on-the-wall sense, but in the neuroscientific, practical, actionable sense. Because purpose is not just a philosophical concept. It is a biological driver. And understanding how it works in your brain will change how you pursue it. Research from the University of Michigan found that people who report a strong sense of purpose show measurably different neurological profiles than those who don't. Higher baseline dopamine sensitivity, stronger prefrontal cortex activity, more robust stress response regulation, greater resilience in the face of setbacks. Purpose, it turns out, doesn't just make life feel more meaningful. It literally makes your brain work better. Viktor Frankl, who developed his theory of meaning while surviving Nazi concentration camps, wrote in Man's Search for Meaning, "Those who have a why to live can bear almost any how." This was not philosophy. This was clinical observation from one of the most extreme human laboratories in history. The people who survived, psychologically, spiritually, sometimes physically, were the ones who had something to live toward. A reason that transcended the suffering of the present moment. Your situation is incomparably less extreme, but the neurology is the same. Purpose activates the brain's forward orientation system, the same system that dopamine is designed to fuel. When that system has a real target, a meaningful direction, a genuine why, it produces sustained motivation that no app, no content, no external validation can replicate or replace. So how do you find yours, or reconnect with one you lost somewhere in the noise? Start with 3 questions. Not in your head, on paper, because writing activates a different level of cognitive processing than thinking. It forces clarity, slows down the noise, and produces insights that internal rumination rarely reaches. Question 1. What would you spend your time on if nobody was watching and nothing was being measured? Not what looks good on Instagram. Not what earns approval from the people in your life. Not what the algorithm rewards. What genuinely absorbs you. What makes hours feel like minutes? What leaves you tired in the best possible way? What you would do even if no one ever knew you were doing it? That answer, whatever it is, contains real signal about where your purpose lives. Question 2. What problem in the world, or in your community, your industry, your family, your field, makes you angry enough, or sad enough, or passionate enough that you can't stay neutral about it? Purpose almost always lives at the intersection of what you're naturally drawn toward and what genuinely needs to exist in the world. Your frustration is not random. Your anger at injustice, your sadness at suffering, your restlessness in the face of problems nobody is solving. These are not personality flaws. They are directional signals. They are your nervous system pointing at the place where your contribution belongs. Question 3. Who do you want to have been? Not who do you want to be. That question lives in the future and is easy to defer. Who do you want to have been, looking back from the end of your life, from the vantage point of a person who lived fully and intentionally, and without the regret of unlived potential? That question has a way of cutting through every excuse, every distraction, every story you've been telling yourself about why now isn't the right time. Because from that vantage point, there is no right time. There is only the time you have and what you chose to do with it. Bronnie Ware, an Australian palliative care nurse, spent years sitting with people in their final weeks of life. She recorded their most common regrets in her book, The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. The number 1 regret, expressed by more people than any other. I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. Not a regret about working too little. Not a regret about missing a trend or failing to optimize a habit. A regret about authenticity. About having had a genuine life to live and spending it performing someone else's version of it instead. Your reclaimed brain, the one you rebuilt this week, is the instrument through which your authentic life gets built. It is more capable right now than it has been in years. More present, more sensitive to real reward, more able to sustain the kind of deep, effortful, meaningful work that actually matters. The only question is where you point it. And here's what I want to leave you with as we approach the final chapter. You don't have to have all the answers today. You don't need a fully formed mission statement or a 5-year plan or a perfectly articulated purpose before you're allowed to move. You just need to be honest about the direction, to take one step toward the thing that feels most real, most true, most genuinely yours. And then another, and then another. Clarity comes from motion, not from waiting. Your brain, recalibrated and awake, and finally working the way it was designed to work, will show you more of the path as you walk it. But you have to start walking. The final chapter is waiting, and it brings everything together. Every lesson, every day, every principle, every shift, compressed into the most important summary of this entire journey. Not as a conclusion, but as a launch pad. Chapter 10. The person you were always supposed to be. Every chapter of this audiobook was building toward one moment. Not the end of a detox. Not the completion of a challenge. But the beginning of a life where your brain, your time, your attention, and your deepest potential finally belong to you. This is that moment. Let's go back to the beginning. 7 days ago, or whenever you first pressed play on this audiobook, you were living in a brain that wasn't fully yours. Not because you were weak, not because you were broken, but because the world you were born into was specifically, scientifically, and relentlessly engineered to hijack the most powerful motivational system in the human body and redirect it toward someone else's profit. You were dopamine hijacked, running on a baseline so elevated by artificial stimulation that real life, real work, real love, real achievement, real joy had gone flat. The things that were supposed to matter didn't land the way they should. The goals that once excited you felt distant and exhausting. The person you knew you were capable of becoming kept getting pushed to someday, to later, to after I get my act together. And you press play. That single decision, that one act of choosing to understand what was happening and do something about it, set everything that followed in motion. So let's honor that by doing something the self-improvement world almost never does. Let's actually look back at what you learned. Not as a list, not as bullet points on a slide, as a story, because your brain encodes stories deeper than any other format, and what we built together over these 10 chapters deserves to be carried forward with full weight. You learned that dopamine is not the pleasure chemical, it is the pursuit chemical, the molecule of motivation, drive, and craving, and that when it gets hijacked by artificially engineered stimulation, social media, infinite scroll, variable reward loops, algorithmic content, it recalibrates your baseline upward until real life can no longer compete. That recalibration is not a character flaw. It is chemistry, and chemistry can be changed. You learned that the detox dip is not a sign of failure. It is the proof of progress. The restlessness, the fog, the irritability of the early days were your brain restructuring. Old pathways going quiet, new ones beginning to warm. The discomfort was never the problem. It was always the process. And the only way out was through, which you proved by going through it. You learned the difference between dopamine fasting and dopamine redirecting. That you cannot starve your brain of its own neurotransmitter, but you can change where that neurotransmitter flows. Away from cheap, engineered, empty hits, toward effortful, meaningful, genuinely rewarding pursuits that leave you full instead of craving more. The river didn't stop flowing. You changed the riverbed. You learned that the people around you are part of your neurological environment. That social contagion is real. That mirror neurons don't discriminate between good habits and destructive ones. And that protecting your reset sometimes means having honest conversations, setting quiet boundaries, and being willing to invest your best presence in the relationships that pull you toward depth instead of noise. Real human connection, present, phone-free, genuinely reciprocal, is one of the most powerful natural dopamine sources available to you. It was always there. The noise just made it hard to access. You learned that willpower is a weather system, and identity is bedrock. That lasting change doesn't come from trying harder. It comes from changing the story you tell yourself about who you are. Every choice you made this week was a vote. Every moment of discomfort you sat with instead of running from was a piece of evidence. Your brain has been updating its model of you in real time, and the model it's running now is fundamentally different from the one it started with 7 days ago. You are not the same person who pressed play. You are someone who proved, through action, that you are capable of choosing depth over noise, effort over convenience, and presence over performance. You learned to build dopamine architecture. That environment is behavior. That friction shapes choices. That attaching dopamine to process instead of outcome makes motivation self-sustaining instead of self-depleting. That protecting your peak morning hours is worth more than any productivity hack ever invented. And that a weekly reset, small, consistent, sustainable, is the maintenance system that keeps the baseline from creeping back up before you notice. You learned that re-entering the world requires intention, not just mindfulness. That cue-induced craving is real, that algorithms are not neutral, and that the conscious return, purposeful, time-limited, rule-based, is what separates people who sustain this change from people who drift back within 2 weeks. And you learned that the reclaimed brain is not the destination, it is the instrument. That focus without direction is restless energy. That the deeper question, what do I actually want, who do I want to have been, what is worth spending this one life on, is the question that a clear, present, fully functioning brain finally makes it possible to answer honestly. So here is the final lesson. The one that every chapter was quietly carrying underneath all the neuroscience, all the protocol, all the strategy and structure and science. You were never the problem. The distraction economy needed you distracted. The attention economy needed your attention. The engagement algorithms needed your engagement. And for a while, for longer than you probably realized, they had it. They had your mornings. They had your focus. They had the hours that were supposed to go toward the life you actually wanted to build. But they never had your potential. That was always intact. Waiting. Underneath the noise, underneath the fog, underneath the years of dopamine hijacking and baseline elevation and prefrontal cortex crowding, the real you was always there. Present. Capable. Ready. This week, you found your way back to that person. Now here is what I need you to do with that. Don't let this be the best week of the year that fades into a memory by February. Don't let the architecture you built collect dust while the old patterns quietly reassemble. Don't let the clarity you earned this week become a story you tell about that time you did a dopamine detox. Let it be the first chapter of a completely different story. One where your best hours belong to your most important work. Where your attention is a resource you invest rather than a commodity you surrender. Where the people you love receive your full presence instead of your divided one. Where the goals that once felt impossibly distant start moving, slowly then rapidly, toward reality. That story is yours to write. The pen is in your hand. The brain doing the writing is clear, present, sensitized, and ready. As Thoreau wrote in Walden, I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. You came to this audiobook for the same reason. To live deliberately. To reclaim what was quietly being taken. To discover, before it was too late, that the life worth living was available to you all along. You found it. Now go live it. And if this journey meant something to you, if something shifted, something clarified, something in you woke back up, share this audiobook with one person in your life who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Mindset Audiobooks. Leave a comment. Leave a review. Because the ripple of one person reclaiming their brain doesn't stop with them. It moves outward, through the social contagion we talked about in Chapter 5, touching everyone they show up more fully for. You are that ripple now. Go make waves.